And BJ, if you'll just verify that you all are seeing full screen my slides here. There we go. That's a come. Okay, great. And I'm going to hide myself. I'll come back on with you. It's a little less distracting if I've got the video off. So when we talk about a season of choice, our landscape today, and BJ made me aware that you recently found out that the rest of your school year was also canceled, and my hearts go out to you. I know there are many on the call that were holding out hope that we would get to finish out some championships and play out some games and simply see our student athletes and be together again. So I empathize with that, and we'll get into that grief process here in a minute. But I wanted to acknowledge that our landscapes in the state of Washington, here in California, continue to shift. And as more stores and parks and public spaces close, I'm reminded of the need to stay open, to change and to creativity and to being of service to others. Last month, as friends in San Francisco went into lockdown, I was reminded of our need collectively to really lock in on our communities and on our families and on supporting one another. And I'm grateful that you're here, and it truly is a privilege to share this space with you today. Helen Keller, this is a favorite quote of mine. She once wrote, "We would never learn to be brave and patient if there were only joy in the world." And I'm a very optimistic person. Joy is one of my favorite words. And last month, we collectively lost the joy that comes from sports. And as a former student athlete and coach, I, like so many of you, went to bed that night that the sports world stopped with a broken heart. And it was a heart that felt the familiar void and vapidness that comes with the sudden end of a season, that feeling that we never get used to, no matter how many seasons we experience it, except that this feeling was no longer about one team or the end of one season, but all teams and all seasons. And that weekend, I was talking with Katie McGann. Katie's the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Compliance and Student Services at UC San Diego. And I was talking and I said, you know, Katie, it's like a season-ending injury, except that all athletes are healthy and capable. And she said, Betsy, I don't mean to be, you know, morbid or dramatic, but it's more like a car wreck because it's sudden and it's unexpected. It's a situation where you're going about your normal routine and you thought you had more time. And that really is what we were experiencing collectively when we talk about this one day where all of a sudden across the entire sports world, sports were no longer. And so what do we do from here? A quote that's always resonated with me is this one here: "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." And the day sports stopped, many of us felt like we lost our ability to choose. This space is unprecedented. There's no script, there's no playbook, there's no right way that's proven to be tried and true. So how do we support our student athletes' ability to choose their response? How do we enable them to write the next chapter in the story of their athletic careers that for many have been put on hold and for some have been wrapped up prematurely? There's a story, it says, but first a story here, and I'll come back on quickly. I don't mean to be offensive at all, and I hope it's not taken that way, but I was, let's see, this was probably 8 years ago. I was playing co-ed flag football, and it was a championship game. We had a great team, and I dove forward to catch a ball, and when I came up, my finger was stuck like this, and it's this finger, my middle finger, on this hand, but it's got this huge bump in it. And I came up right away. My fingers locked like that. I went back to the huddle, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's not good." I was like, no, you know, it's fine. We've got 3 minutes left. We're gonna win. Like, it's fine. And I was an assistant coach at UC San Diego women's basketball. Didn't have health insurance, but I did have a wonderful chiropractor that had an x-ray machine. So next morning, they took an x-ray for free. I brought it to the athletic training room because that's where you go when you've been an athlete your whole life and you don't have health insurance. It happened to be the day the team doctor was coming in. And she took a look at the x-ray and she said, "Betsy, you have an avulsion fracture and you'll likely need surgery if you're going to heal properly." And I was like, "Well, if we didn't do that, what else could we do?" And she said, "Well, you could try physical therapy, but I don't think it'll ever be the same." I said, "Okay, I appreciate it so much." And I didn't get surgery. And the reason that I point this out is because I tried to be okay when it wasn't okay. And yes, there was a financial component involved, but the larger point here is that when we rush to be all right, when we don't give time and attention to that which is broken so that we can heal fully, we never fully heal. And that will stay with us for the rest of our lives or our career. So this is a time where healing is necessary. And so that's where I want to start today. In talking about healing, there's an acronym that's been very helpful and easy for folks to remember when we talk about working through grief. And it's this idea of SARA. And SARA stands for sadness, anger, resentment, acceptance, and health. So SARAH, sadness, anger, resentment, acceptance, and health. These are typically the stages that an individual will move through when they're working through grief. The tricky bit about all of this is that these are non-linear. So the day sports ended, some individuals on this call or our student athletes may have felt deep sadness or anger or resentment. You know, why me, especially basketball? We were just about to have our tournaments. You know, March Madness was upon us. Why now? Why me? Why here? And individuals will move back and forth through these stages. It's not like you pass through one and then you get to check it off and you're done. So asking ourselves, and then also keeping in mind for the individuals that we're responsible to and for, asking the question, what does that look like? You know, what does sadness, anger, resentment, acceptance, and health look like for the individuals that I work with, for the individuals that I coach, and for my colleagues respectively? I was talking with my friend Piers. He's a longtime friend and colleague and owner of Performance Colorado. And he specializes in mental skills and resilience, and specifically performance psychology for athletes and individuals in high-risk occupations. So in the military, in the police force. And he said, you know, Betsy, it's really important to keep in mind that there's no need to change how our student athletes feel. Rather than asking our individuals to change, invite them to ask themselves, who do I want to be during this time? What do I want to do moving forward that allows me to look back in a way that's helpful? And I thought that was a really great question to keep in mind for all of us. Who do I want to be during this time? There's a tool that I love and I use often with teams, and you can see it on the left here, and it's called the feelings wheel. You can Google it and Pinterest will feed you back, you know, a variety of options. The feelings wheel is a great tool for individual reflection and for coaching others. So often with the best of intentions, we will ask other people, how do you feel? And that's a great question, except it makes an assumption that the individual that we're talking with has a robust enough emotional vocabulary to accurately describe what's going on for them. So the feelings wheel can be a great way to add layers or texture or substance to these kind of core feelings: sad, mad, scared, joyful, powerful, peaceful. And again, there's different variations of these, but if someone wasn't mad, let's say they weren't mad, they were embarrassed. Or, you know, they weren't sad, they were disappointed. So there's different flavors within these emotions. And this is a tool that can help us start to articulate for ourselves and invite others to do the same so that we have a bigger pool to draw from when it comes to emotion. What you see on the right-hand side, my grandmother passed away last November. She lived with my parents, and I happened to be home visiting them on the Central Coast of California at the time that she passed. And the hospice workers who came to our house each day were absolute saints and spoke with our family at length about the grieving process. And my grandma's decline was rapid. My twin brother was in New York. My sister was in Austin. So they experienced my grandma's passing at a distance. And grieving for a loss in the absence of shared space is something that most of our athletic community is going through now. So we have this collective loss, and yet because of social distancing and physical isolation, we're grieving from a distance. So I thought it was important to bring in some of the advice that the hospice workers had given us as it applies directly to the way that the athletic community is working through grief during the COVID-19 pandemic. The first mark on the right, grief belongs to the griever. The point here is that there's no right or best way to grieve, that we each go through our own process. Being present and listening, the hospice workers reminded us that even at a distance, via FaceTime or Zoom, being present with one another and holding space to simply listen was the, quote, best thing that we could possibly do as we work through our own grief. We were encouraged to avoid trying to find the right words to fix any feeling or situation that arose. And there really is, I mean, there's no fixing the death of a family member, nor is it in our power to fix or change the loss of a season for our coaches and for our student athletes. And then finally at the bottom, when in doubt or at a loss for what to do, we were encouraged to choose honesty and kindness. And those were two traits that are highly valued in my family and which our global community really cries out for in this time. The research on Gen Z, of which all of our student athletes are members of, cites that they value honesty in leadership. They desire feedback that's delivered in a kind, caring, and encouraging manner. So when in doubt, choose kindness. As you work to support those around you, one thing I'd like you to keep in mind is that there are going to be days and times or certain people with whom we totally miss the mark. And I ask that you keep in mind the goal here is not perfection, it's intention, to keep showing up for those in need. And that's the best that we can hope to do for each other during this time. That and washing your hands and staying home. This was something that Ellen had posted from her Instagram account, and it's a picture of a man who lives in New York, and you can see he's in his bathroom and he's holding the shower rod while standing next to the tub, and he's got his headphones on the way he would be riding the subway. I thought this was a great reminder that it's important we keep in mind that the identity of many people in our community, both athletic directors and coaches and student athletes, is intricately tied to sport. So our worlds revolve around the routines of practice and preparation and competition. And my friend Tammy Matheny, she's a mental skills specialist out of South Carolina. She reminded me the other day that the only bad routine is not having one. So finding routine, being able to create it for ourselves and for others is crucially important in this time. With the time I have left, I'm going to go through a variety of options to help us collectively shift the focus from what we've lost to creative ways that our teams can leave their unique mark on this challenging time. And as I go through these, please feel free to take notes on anything you find beneficial. Also modify any activity suggestions based on your coaches, your sports, your roster sizes, the geographic location of the high school that you're with, the age of your student athletes or level of competition. Only take what serves you. And at the end, I'll take questions about next steps and we can talk about continuing the conversation around options that are presented here. This was, and I put this up, the goal in everything we're about to cover is to help put our student athletes' current experience in perspective without diminishing that experience. And that's really important. How do we help them move forward without making less of the space that they are in right now? And this can skillfully be done through acknowledgement and validation and the illustration of choice. We may no longer have our seasons. We don't even have our school year anymore, but we do have choices. And here's a few to get you started. When in doubt, choose gratitude. Start with gratitude. This was a tweet that I'd put out back on the 14th when we were dealing with the cessation of sport and the loss of one of our country's most favorite tournaments, March Madness. So taking what we've lost and instead finding an opportunity to express gratitude to individuals instead. So in the same time it would take to fill out a bracket, maybe less, we could write a note of acknowledgement or thank you to the student athletes that are part of our favorite team or program, thanking them for what they've given up, regardless of whether or not you believe they had a choice, but what they've lost so that we can help keep each other safe. I'm going to go through these one at a time. And again, take notes if there's something you'd like me to double click on or circle back on. Connecting with, let's see, a younger person. And I think especially at the high school level, I have great compassion for the way that as coaches, as administrators, we are educators. We're educators first, and to be able to model as leaders, leadership for our young people and help connect them to a larger perspective. So the letter you see here with the heart on it, perhaps you can connect with, even virtually, writing a message to camp registrants or a class at a local elementary school. Ask what they're doing while they're not in school and maybe share how the individuals in your program are staying on top of their game. This letter that says, "Dear Self," one of my favorite activities as a college coach was for all of our incoming freshmen, we would ask them to write a letter to themselves where we said, can you write a letter of recommendation that you would want us as your coaches to be able to send on your behalf by the time you graduate? And this was a great exercise, especially transitioning from high school, of asking them to put in their own words, who do I want to be by the time I leave? What is it that I want my coaches and my teammates to be able to say about me, about who I was, about how I showed up for this program? So taking that idea and then scaling it to this time, asking your student athletes to write a letter to themselves about what it's like not being able to play during this time. Yes, it can be therapeutic, but more so, they get to keep this with them for the entirety of their career, whether they stop playing after high school, or they play through college, or they play rec sports. Being able to have that letter on days when they feel like, I don't really want to practice today, or like this is such a grind, to be able to pull that out and say, oh man, remember when there was a time where this wasn't an option, where I would have given anything to see my teammates and to be able to practice? That can be a really powerful tool for perspective. The headphones here, listening. And when it comes to communication, you've likely heard the greatest barrier in communication is that we don't listen to understand, we listen to respond. And during this time, it is crucially important that we make an effort to put in extra time listening. Most folks, if you overhear conversations, are simply competing for their time to talk. And I'm going to encourage you to take a conversational turn off. And I'll mention resources at the end, but I have a YouTube channel. It's just Betsy Butterick. There's 30 ACT videos on that channel, and ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. These are short 2-minute videos, roughly 2 minutes or less, that give anybody something they can do today to better communicate and connect with other people. The most recent video that you'll see in the order that they're posted is not an ACT video, but it's a video I created for Huddle in collaboration with Huddle, and it's 5 tips for having more connective conversations. If you'd like to become a better listener, check out the ACT videos. There's 2 or 3 specific to listening, but also take a listen to that most recent video, because that's going to give you some resources as well. The namaste right here. Namaste at home and slow the spread of COVID-19. This representation here is reflective of some sort of meditative practice, and it's a gateway into mental skills training. There's so many different apps out there, whether it's something like Headspace. The one I use is called Insight Timer. Calm is another one, Simple Habit. Deepak and Oprah currently have a 21-day meditation series that's a guided meditation that's open to anyone. It's free and it's about hope. So if this would benefit you or your student athletes to take on or explore some sort of meditative practice, now's as good a time as any. The paper you see on the right, encouraging coaches or student athletes to write out a practice plan for their day. So what can they do where they are with what they have to work on their individual skills while we can't practice together? The X's and O's that you see over here on the left, perhaps it could be an interesting exercise to invite your student athletes to design a new drill or come up with a new play. So if you have the ability to access video, you could even send clips of your opponents or of a professional team relative to your sport and ask your student athletes, how can we defend this? Or even asking, what do you notice? What are they doing well? One of the facts around Generation Z is they love to co-create. So this is an opportunity at a distance to invite them into that space and facilitate their learning and development virtually and from afar. The hand and the notebook here, encouraging either yourself or your student athletes to journal about their experience during this historical time, written or video. And a lot of student athletes today prefer video. They're a very visual generation. But just, again, creating some sort of log where they're able to look back and gain perspective later in life about what this time was and what it was like to be in their experience. Speaking of perspective, these 3 go together. So we've got a coffee bean, a penny, and then a paper clip. And one thing that I've encouraged some of the teams that I work with to do, the coaches I work with specifically, is to consider starting some sort of team jar or bucket where you can put 1 small item per player each day that you go without the ability to practice or compete in your season or sport. So using things that are relatively inexpensive, again, not trying to break the bank here, but coffee beans, pennies, paper clips, this can serve as a powerful visual reminder in the future. And I love puns. So when it's been a hard day, or things don't quite make sense, or we're just trying to hold it all together, this is something that, besides being a visual reminder, let's say you did coffee beans and you've got this large bucket of coffee beans in your locker room or somewhere in a shared team space, and it's been a hard day for someone, they can go and take one of those beans out and immediately see, I'm having a hard time today, but this is one small moment in time compared to all the other days that I get to be with my team and practice my sport. So again, just something we can do now that's going to help bring things into perspective a little later on. Some of the teams that I work with have loved this exercise, the check boxes you see on the lower left, and that is to create a scouting report for COVID-19. So what are the tendencies of this pandemic? What is it that we need to do as a team in order to defeat it? What role will each individual need to play in order for us to be successful? So again, a fun activity that brings awareness to the current situation, while also focuses on what do we need to do together so that we can come out with a win. The megaphone here, team PSAs, thanking people for helping to flatten the curve in our communities. There's a difference I feel between thanking and asking. And I talk about this in the Winning with Words digital course, which I'll mention towards the end. This idea of framing things in the future positive, productive. So using language to start to create the outcome that you'd like to see long-term. Reward the behavior that you want to see, shift the perspective by involving your student athletes in the bigger picture. So can they create some sort of PSA or perhaps some sort of team thank you for the healthcare workers that are supporting our local community? Positive vibes, rephrasing in the positive. And BJ, this will sound familiar. This is part of almost every presentation I do because it's so important. Rephrasing in the positive. Sometimes we feel like positivity is like trying to sprinkle, sunshine and rainbows and unicorns on a negative situation. The research on positivity is so convincing as far as positive environments outperform negative environments every time. Positive emotions, such as gratitude, actually help athletes perform better. There's so much in the way that small shifts in our language can create a more positive outcome. So for example, if we didn't call this social distancing or physical distancing, what could we call it that has a more positive association? So some suggestions would be, I'm going to take caring space. So I care about other people, and so for that reason, I'm going to take space from them. Have fun with it, but how can you rephrase the things that we feel like are negative in this time to have a more positive association that speaks to the why behind what we're doing? The idea with the light bulb, what ideas can your student athletes or your coaches come up with for maybe virtual fundraisers to donate testing kits or needed medical equipment in the state of Washington? Is there something that we could do there? And then the books and the Apple, can you set up a Zoom call or a Skype call with a class from your local elementary school who the individuals are at their own homes, and set up a visual story time, a virtual story time, where a student athlete can read to a class of elementary school kids from their home? That's something that I've seen few educators do, and it's really worked well in terms of mentorship, but also giving the teachers that are working with our young students who are trying to learn virtually for the first time, giving them a little bit of a break and support as well. So if that would be something your team's into, take it and run with it. The microphone and the book here. So what podcasts or books can you work through as a team or as a department during this time? Ask your student athletes to share their favorites. Create a list with your student athletes or among your coaches and your staff, and then share your recommendations with the larger community. The heart here, self-care. What does it look like for you and for each member of your program? How are you intentionally taking care of yourselves during this time, separate from anything having to do with work or sport? As administrators and coaches, so much of our time and attention is spent on caring for others. Making sure that we're not pouring from an empty cup, that we're taking care of ourselves as well, is important during this time. I love to eat. I know some people have said I need social distancing from my refrigerator. No judgment here, but this is a unique opportunity for our student athletes aren't eating lunch at school. Can you do a virtual cooking class within your department or within your team? Maybe ask the student athletes that are home with their families to share a family recipe, or even virtually, walk the team through making their favorite family meal. Not all of our student athletes know how to cook outside of mac and cheese or making ramen. So this can be a fun time to kind of brush up on our chef skills collectively. This new icon that you see in the upper right, learning new things. What have you learned in the past week? What have your coaches learned? What have your student athletes learned that you can share with each other? Anything. I watched there's a documentary called The Game Changers, and it's on plant-based diets with high performance athletes. So I learned a lot about nutrition in the past week because I watched that documentary. But anything that you learn that's new, that you feel like might be interesting or of value, go ahead and share it with each other. The ha-ha. I love humor, anything around humor. I saw a great tweet the other day that athletic training rooms across the country are reporting 0 season-ending injuries this year. I mean, that anything that we can do, many of you likely saw that sock puppet. I think it was like day 6 of quarantine in New York, where the sock puppet was eating the cars on the road from the high-rise apartment. Anything that brings a little bit of humor to the situation, find the good and then share it. As far as your medical professionals, call your local children's hospital. See if you can set up a Q&A with kids that are in the hospital who like sports. Maybe send video messages from your student athletes or from your team of thanks and gratitude to hospital workers for putting their health at risk to provide care for other people. I'll wrap up with a few more here. So the box with the arrows. One of the things that we continue to collectively work through in this time, and I invite you to think of your department, your team, your student athletes as these oversized boxes. If you're going to lift an oversized box that's a little bit clunky and that's heavy, you need to lift from the bottom. So our teams, our departments are full of a lot of heavy stuff right now, and we need to lift from the bottom. So look for those who are struggling. Look for those who need a little more of your time and attention right now, who might be a little fragile during this time or is having a hard time just kind of keeping this end up, so to speak. The weights here, a team fitness challenge. And coaches, you can create videos that your student athletes can do from home, or you can encourage your student athletes to make videos that they can share with their teammates. So we've already started to see pro athletes and teams sharing what they're doing. Our teams can absolutely follow suit. And this is a fun way to engage them in healthy activity while they're isolated, while they're at home. The trophies, and I know BJ and Cole, we talked about this a little before today's call, recognizing that there won't be sports banquets for many of our teams. There's not that closure that we typically have. So how do we honor our graduating seniors? You know, can you put your team in charge of highlight videos? For sports or individuals where maybe there is limited or no video, can you gather or create video testimonials from teammates on what the graduating seniors have meant to their program? And you can include as many meaningful community members as possible. So other teachers or coaches, parents, teammates. And similarly, many teams will not have those end of season banquets or those closing moments with a team, traditional season awards. So how can you organize virtually? What new awards can you create? Maybe instead of, you know, Rookie of the Year, MVP, you have most likely to wash their hands or leader through adversity. Again, get creative with it. But how can we take this opportunity to recognize in a non-traditional way what we value in the student athletes in our program? This last one, lower left, is going to be a little more forward-facing, a little more long-term. But how can your high school student athletes use this experience in a future job interview? And I know that not all of our student athletes are thinking about this at this time, but every employer wants to hire leaders who respond in times of crisis, who demonstrate grit and resilience and empathy and compassion. So what story are the individuals in our programs writing to be able to tell in that interview of how they got through this season and this time in their lives? The question here, asking high quality questions. And what I mean by asking high quality questions is to intentionally ask questions which create greater space for dialogue. Instead of asking, you know, how are you? You might say, tell me about life, what life is like in your world day to day. Anything that allows you to stay curious and stay open. Acknowledge, validate, and invite folks to share what's true for them. But let's see if we can get away from our standard rote questions and maybe ask something that's a little more curious, a little more inviting. The crayon here, I love to color. I know they call them adult coloring books. I think we should just call them coloring books because the point where we said coloring is only for kids is, I think, where we started to veer off the path. But if you are an administrator or a coach and you have school-age kids at home, invite them to color a picture or write a letter thanking your student athletes on your team or in your school for helping to keep them safe, and then take a picture and then share it virtually. The whistle here, redefine the roles within your department or team. So maybe no longer is there a head coach or an assistant coach, but maybe now you have a coach who's in charge of the joke of the day, or a coach that's in charge of videos of other countries doing amazing things, of people being great humans despite lockdowns and limitations. So how can we as educators help connect our student athletes to the global community? The sheet here with the J on it, I talked a little bit about journaling before. If it would benefit you as an administrator, as a coach, or if it would benefit your student athletes, consider keeping a simple gratitude journal. And it can be as basic as answering questions or journal prompts such as, I'm grateful for, and then list a few things, or today I love/enjoyed, and write a few things, or I'm proud of myself for, and whatever they're proud of themselves for today, or today I took care of myself by. Those are 4 great prompts that even if you use one of them would allow them to pause and pay attention to what's happening now. And then finally, the cap here, if it would benefit you as administrators, as coaches in your department, to create some sort of personal development convention. So you can hold assistant coach roundtables. You can encourage the people that you work with to do remote presentations in their skill areas. Have fun with it. Speakers, facilitators like myself have had events canceled left and right. That doesn't mean that we stop working or cease to be of value. So if you want quick hits for improving communication, again, there's 30 ACT videos on the YouTube channel. You could maybe assign one to each staff member and then have them do a mini presentation on it. Again, ACT stands for Active Communication Technique. So many of our sports organizations and governing bodies are finding ways to be of service. They're unlocking resource libraries. I'm really excited for everyone on this call to finally begin to share resources in a way that maybe we haven't before because of this global pandemic. And then last but not least, I'll wrap this up here, dogs. I mean, anything with dogs, as often as possible, please share. That's Phelan on the left. This is Samantha on the right. So if you have a dog, you can tweet at me your dog photos. I love to see them, but I think that dogs make everything better, and I'm grateful for them, especially during this time. So in closing, history is going to remember March 12th as the day that sports stopped. And the story yet to be written is, how did we collectively respond? It would be so easy for our student athletes to look back on this time as the season that was taken from them. And we have the collective opportunity as coaches, as administrators, to help our student athletes create a different memory and create a better memory. My hope is that the options put forth today are just the beginning. And while none of us has all the answers, all of us, I believe, can answer the call for compassion and community and connection that is so deeply needed during this challenging time. This is a season unlike any other, and this is a season of choice. And I hold immense gratitude for the work that you do, for the time that you've put in to be here with me today. If you want to connect, these are a few ways that you can do so. So on Twitter at Betsy Butterick, on Instagram at Betsy_the coaches coach. Again, the ACT videos on YouTube. All of my social media you can link to through betsybutterick.com. And the last part that I'll touch on before we get into questions is I have a digital course called Winning with Words, Championship Communication for Coaches. It was released in the beginning of this year and designed because as coaches, we can't play for them. And words are never just words. Words create worlds. And how we use our language intentionally does so much for the experience that we create for our student athletes. So I want to back out for a second here, and we'll pop the camera back on. And I want to show you briefly, and then BJ will come into what questions there are out there. But Winning with Words, so the classic course, and this is something that I'm working with BJ on to be able to provide this as a continuing education option for all coaches in the state of Washington, and to do so at a very affordable rate. So we are working on that right now, but Winning with Words, Championship Communication for Coaches is over 100 videos. It covers 12 different sections or 12 modules, which you see over on the left-hand side. And you can link to this through the website. When we talk about using language specifically to not only increase our opportunities for success with our programs, but to elevate the quality of the student athlete experience. And we can do this through language, which I think is the coolest thing. So I'd love for you to check out the course. There'll be more information for you coming in the probably the next week or so as BJ and I continue to collaborate. At this point, I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'll start that with typically at the end of any presentation, there's a natural close that most speakers and facilitators use, which is to simply say, are there any questions? The difference that I'll ask you, and we'll see who can answer it first, is what's the difference if instead of saying, are there any questions, I said instead, what questions do you have? Anyone who can tell me what changed between those two?
I feel like the second way of framing the question shows that you expect answers, that there
Yes,
are answers.
correct. So there's nothing inherently wrong with, are there any questions? Again, it's a natural close for coaches, for speakers, anybody that's taught something. The difference is in removing a barrier. So removing a barrier to communication. When I say, are there any questions? Two barriers that the individual has to overcome. Number one is they first have to admit there's something they didn't understand, and then they have to have the courage to ask that question. To your point, Stacy, when I say, what questions do you have? It conveys to the people that I'm talking with, there's likely questions out there. And I've instead created this welcoming environment for them to ask the question. So I've removed one of those two barriers. And again, these are the small shifts that we can make using language that make a big difference in terms of our student athlete experience. So thank you. With that said, what questions do you have?
Betsy, I have a question about, you went through a ton of icons and came up with many different suggestions, but of the schools or people who you've worked with, and BJ, you put one down here. What are some really concrete examples of things that people are doing right now that are working really well to help through some of these difficult times?
Yep.
What is something that you know that people are doing that's working?
Great. There's a quick check-in that is working well for a lot of the teams that I work with. And typically, I think the frequency I'm seeing most often is one call a week with the entire team. A lot of these teams that I work with are college teams where they've got kids that are international. So coordinating time zones can relate to why they only have one meeting a week. A great check-in to start with is the 3 W's. So what are you working on? What are you worried about? And what's a recent win that you've had? And when we talk about win, that's separate from obviously the context of sports, but what's something that has gone well for you recently or that you're excited about? So what are you working on? What are you worried about? And what's a recent win? Depending on who's on your team, if you have maybe more introverts that would like more time to process, these are questions you can send in advance. And then on that virtual call, your individuals on your team can go through and share that, or you can simply share it in writing. But that's a great way to check in and kind of get the pulse with what's going on for folks where they are. Things that are working really well. I love seeing I think I've seen soccer and softball do this most often, but where one player's, kicking a ball and then they kick it off screen and then the ball gets tossed from off screen onto another player. And so seeing what feels like a connective team, even though it's different virtual clips. A lot of programs are doing behind the scenes looks or takeovers. So they'll do an Instagram takeover where an individual student athlete takes over the account for their team and they take them through a day in the life of. So wherever they are, whatever it is that they're doing, whether they're spending time on classwork and then how they're working out or introducing them to their dog or family pet. So I think anything that gives an inside look, those are really content rich pieces of material for others to get a look at what's it like for our student athletes, in the high school scene to be going through this together. And other student athletes see that and they feel a little less alone. I mean, that's the feedback that I've been getting consistently. There's an individual who is in a neighborhood, and this is a high school student athlete, where her neighbors have 4 kids and apparently a bunch of sticky notes, but every day on the garage, they'll write out messages in sticky notes. And so when they put the garage door down each morning, it'll have a different message for the people in the neighborhood. Just stuff like that. I mean, I think the coolest thing in my neighborhood, getting out roughly once a day to walk around, is, hey, well, I'm seeing more people than I've ever seen. I'm like, you live here? I have never seen you before. But also that from across the street, complete strangers will say hi. And every time I walk, without fail, every single person that I pass says hello. And it's just this common acknowledgement of we're in this together. And I hope that sticks after, the landscape changes and we're back to some semblance of normal, because there's a connection happening right now that's wonderful and beautiful. And I hope we keep that.
Thank you.
Hey, Suzanne, I noticed that Suzanne Vick is on here from Curtis High School, and she's been doing videos for her kids, and she's also read them a book. Suzanne, I'm just wondering if you can chime in on how that's being received.
It's hard. It's so hard to get that far out of my box. I don't like that. But when this started, I was like, how can I keep that connection with my kids I was thinking about when I started 2 years ago, I'd say good morning to everybody and they just look at me. They wouldn't even say good morning. And now I say good morning and everybody says good morning back, and just wanted to keep that connection going. So I started with doing these just vision meetings. Yesterday was rough because of obviously, what had just taken place, but just trying to have a kind of 60-second clip that inspires our student athletes, our alumni, our community. And then I did read a book out loud. And let me just tell you, it takes a really long time to read a book out loud and upload it. I have some coaches that are requiring it for their athletes, and they're doing book studies with that. I've uploaded it to my Curtis High School webpage. I have a couple people that were reading faster than I could upload it. And so I felt this pressure to keep going, because when you get to a chapter and the book's not there, you want to finish it. So do have some people that have actually finished the book. It was 63 chapters long.
Wow.
It's called The Stone by Joshua Metcalf. And it was good. I might read The Hard Hat next out loud, because that was the book we did last year as a book study. But yeah, just trying to find ways to inspire and empower people to be great during this time.
That's awesome that you did that, Suzanne. And I want to double click on what you said. It's so far outside your comfort zone. I realize that especially at the high school level, many coaches are also teachers. And the way that the educational community is being forced to pivot to online learning in a way that many of them are very uncomfortable with. So given your relationship with technology, I was on a call the other day, 32,000 speech language pathologists were on the same call learning how to do teletherapy in a very short amount of time. So I recognize that this is a huge shift in so many ways. And I love that you're doing what you can, even though it's uncomfortable, to stay connected and to offer resources. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
On this topic of classroom and athletics, what recommendations do you have about multiple sport athletes who are also students and possibly being, I use this word carefully, inundated with interactions with 3 different coaches and possibly 6 different classroom teachers simultaneously?
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Great question, because this is important. We think we're being helpful, and when everyone's being helpful, it is very easy to start to overwhelm our student athletes. The best piece of advice I can offer here is to ask them, like, what's your load like right now? What feels like too much? What feels like the right amount? Inviting them to be participants in the conversation of how much they take on, and knowing that this is new for them as well. There's going to be an adjustment period. What feels like too much today might not feel like too much 2 weeks from now. But having that conversation intentionally of one acknowledgement. I recognize there's a lot coming at you right now. I want to help support you in what you're being asked to do. Tell me about what would be most helpful for you, either in terms of frequency or duration, or, is it easier for you to create your own workouts to stay sharp on your skills, or would you like me to help create some with you? Whatever it happens to be, but ask them. Simply asking, I can't tell you the number of people that are like, thank you, because my professors keep giving me more, and they think, well, they're just at home not doing anything. So my teachers have given me more work to do than I would have if I was sitting in class with my high school class every week. So asking, but that's a great point to keep in mind, that what's going on for us, and as much as we try to be helpful, might unintentionally be overwhelming our student athletes. Thank you.
Betsy, are you plugged into the chat room right now?
I am. Yep.
Katie just added a question there.
Okay, great. Larger teams. Yeah, great. Divide and conquer. So the question is around full track team of 80-ish kids. Huge responsibility. And again, you're one person, maybe you've got a few staff members. That's a lot of kids. When I say divide and conquer, and this is part of that co-creating with today's student athlete, it doesn't have to be your captains. It can be anybody that wants to volunteer or step up during this time, but breaking them into, let's say, pods, like groups of 10. And maybe you give the same interactive activity or question or prompt to each group, and then they do it together. So they're meeting in a smaller group and having a more focused conversation. And then they're going to come back, and on the next team call, they can report in from each of their groups. So we feel oftentimes a responsibility as coaches and administrators to be the leader and to provide the thing, asking our student athletes to join us where we're leveling the playing field and saying, let's do this together. can you help me? And giving them that invitation, super empowering for our student athletes and takes a lot of stress off of you. So if there's ways that you can creatively divide and conquer, invite them to help you figure that out. That's a really connective exercise for this time.
I don't want to take too many questions or ask too many questions, but BJ, you might help me out here too. You used the example of X's and O's, Betsy, and when we're in season or out of season right now, can a basketball coach right now be sending out videos of X's and O's and have them look at analysis when it seems like that would be out of season versus a track coach where you might be specifically saying, go practice your hurdle form in front of a mirror?
Yeah, so great question. And number one, check with the compliance. I'm not familiar with the specific rules around in season, out of season at the high school level in the state of Washington. Check with compliance first, the resource within your department or school, to make sure that you are within the guidelines and appropriate rules for engagement. That said, giving them resources for education without requiring them to do anything of, you know, hey, here's a video clip that I loved for these reasons. If you'd like to participate, I'd be curious about what you see. So it's nothing that's required, but it's framed in the context of this is for your benefit. It's not something that you have to do, but I'd like to contribute to your ongoing education during this time. Only if that falls within what's acceptable. And BJ and Cole, maybe you could help direct to resources where coaches could find out that information. But yeah,
You know,
please don't end
Bruce,
up
it's a
in
good
violation.
question. It's a good question you're asking, Bruce, and we're getting quite a few of those questions. Cindy, are you up to chiming in? I noticed Cindy Ad sits on the call as well.
Yeah, I was anxious to answer and jump in on that one. And we had a pretty thorough discussion about this in our staff meeting yesterday, is that the out of season rules are still in place through May 30. So the only coaches who should be providing any sport specific information to the athletes is your spring coaches. Everybody else, if they want to provide some general conditioning that's open and available to all students and not just the basketball team, all of the same out of season rules are still in place right now.
That's great. Can I put this out to the group? Rick asked a great question. It said, my district will not allow the use of live video or audio meetings with students. We can do email or pre-recorded videos via WeVideo. Do you have any suggestions for truly staying connected as a team when we cannot connect in real time? Great question. And I'd be curious to find out more about what the rules are, if it varies per school or per sport. One suggestion along those lines, Rick, would be to create some sort of shared document. So instead of individual emails or an email thread where it's like death by reply all because there's so many individuals on your team, creating a shared document. Let's say it's a Google Doc where I put up a question of the day or a joke of the day and then ask people to contribute. So it's not in real time, but it's all in one space, even though it's written. That can feel more connective than back and forth emails or the video.
Rick, will your guys' district allow you to use simply, I guess, audio? You said no, but what about a phone call? A lot of
So our
smartphone
coaches are not
users.
supposed to connect with students via phone or text,
Wow.
or via team meetings, any of that. They're very strict on privacy and security and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of restrictions to work within, and teachers are in the same boat. So they're trying to find ways to keep connected and build relationships without that real-time connection. So just looking for ideas of what other people are doing. I really like the shared document idea. That's great. So
And
thank
that's
you.
tough, Rick. I feel for you. I mean, it's one thing to be physically isolated. It's another when you feel like your hands are tied.
It is what it is, and I don't want to badmouth the district. I'm sure they have very good reasons for it. And I know there's issues with Zoom that we've all probably read about. So just looking for other ideas, but thank you.
There is a Zoom bingo if you find yourself on a lot of Zoom calls where, you know, every time someone says you're still on mute or can you see me now? Or yeah, if it's more fun to have in your Zoom meetings, consider printing off a Zoom bingo sheet.
Are there any other questions from our participants kind of directed for Betsy at this time?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
If Zoom is not an option, what other platforms are people using for video conferencing? I just kind of want to throw that out there to everyone.
Yeah, I've seen, I mean, Skype, I've seen GoToMeeting, WebEx, something called Blue Jeans, which I'm not familiar about, but there's, and then educationally, and again, I'm out of the immediate teaching space, but I know for educators specifically, things like Flipboard and virtual classrooms, the name's escaping me right now, but depending on whether it's more from a coaching perspective or it's more from an educational platform, there are different platforms that groups are utilizing outside of Zoom.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mary Jo, there's a couple in the chat bar
Yep.
too. I don't know if you're plugged into that, but there's a couple suggestions in the chat bar.
Okay. That's cool.
And
Any more?
Stacy, I
Go
saw
ahead.
your question about sport-related video clips and tweets that go out to a general audience. Can you help me clarify your question? Is this, are you allowed to, or are you looking for where could you get?
So I'm thinking in terms of our school district was asking all of our employees to reach out to the kids and make sure that the kids were okay. And I know we have some coaches that have been sending, video clips of great basketball plays, funny football plays, some of it has been a little bit more conditioning related, some of it is instructional related, some of it's favorite players, favorite teams, that kind of stuff. But given what Cindy said about only spring coaches reaching out to kids, I'm just trying to clarify what is the acceptable limit on that, given that our districts are constantly telling us reach out to the kids, make sure the kids are okay. And when you're saying that to coaches are wanting to talk about sports and the sports that they coach. It's not the same as having a team meeting, but from what Cindy said, I'm just wanting a little bit of clarification around that. Which we could do in a different format. I don't want to use up all your time on this, but.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One thing I have seen, and again, put this wherever it falls within the rules that you have, but some coaches, because they don't want to overwhelm their student athletes, let's say they'll put things on their individual or their personal Twitter account that their team can go and look at any time. It's not a requirement. It's simply resources that are available for anyone, but specifically that their team can look at or view without sending them emails or texts directly with these items, so that it's more of a choice than it is any kind of imposition or breaking the rules of some sort. And again, I'm not trying to push the envelope in the gray area there, but if you're looking for some way that you can connect while still honoring the space that certain districts are asking us to give our student athletes, posting on your own social media for anybody to see, but alerting your student athletes that if they want to check out some of the things that you're finding or that you feel are valuable, that they can do so if they choose.
I want to chime back in on this one too, Stacy, and I'm sorry for the confusion that I may have caused with that and saying that the out of season rules are continue to be in place. But we also recognize the value of coaches reaching out and to connecting to their kids. It just can't be that they are sending out plays or expected workouts. We know of a football coach that was sending out a challenge to his players that the challenge of the day was to make their bed. It's a lot of different creative things that can be done to stay connected, because that's so very important, as long as the kids are not feeling pressured, it's not sports specific, and they're not having expectations about their involvement in the sport itself.
And I'd kind of chime in. I know a lot of coaches, they're kind of a lifeline for their kids at school. And there's, just like in the normal school day, there's no reason why coaches can't be just checking in and seeing how kids are doing. It's really around those sports specific efforts. So just to echo what Cindy's saying, in a normal school day, coaches are going to go interact with kids and check in and see how life is. And those are, of course, encouraged and supported during this time, especially.
And if I can just add one last thing, we ran this, not only did we talk about it as a staff, but we brought it to the board yesterday to have them take a look at waiving the out of season or declaring the end of spring season earlier. And for the very reasons that have been discussed, they chose not to do that. And so the emphasis is really on, and Bruce asked the question early on, not overwhelming the students, but not letting our best intents and the right intent actually being more troublesome than the goal of what we're doing. So we'll get a 2-minute drill out this week that will get it out to everybody. So really appreciate the questions. But the answers that BJ and Cindy gave were exactly what the board had requested yesterday as well.
And Susan, to answer Suzanne, to answer your question about will we reconsider, I think that executive board will continue to look at that time frame. And if there's some different direction coming out from our government around people getting back together, would the board consider having the spring season end a little sooner so summer can kind of start? I think they would consider all of that, but they just want to be careful and diligent and aware. So the executive board is meeting regularly. And so if there's a chance of that changing, they'll definitely get that out. Any other questions for Betsy since we have her attention today on communication or anything else that we could ask her?
And please, if you think of things, this isn't like a speak now or forever hold your peace. If you think of something, go to betsybutterick.com. There's a contact form there. My email's on there. All the social media, you can send me a direct message through any of those. But if there's something on your mind that you think about later and you're like, ah, man, I wish I would have asked, please reach out. I'd love to connect with you and support you because I have so much empathy and compassion for the position that you're in right now and appreciate the ways that you are working in ways you've never had to work before to best support our student athletes. So thank you for all of your efforts. And there's no right way to do this. You're doing a great job. If nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job. And thank you.
Betsy and BJ, how close are we to, or how close are you guys to putting the coursework with the WIA, like as you mentioned earlier, Betsy?
That's a great question. So I have, and that's on BJ and I. So once I get through this week, next week is focused on formalizing the proposal. Right now, the course is $297 for an individual. I'm looking to get that down transparently to less than $20 per coach in the state of Washington. So if this was an in-person, it's 3.5 hours long. If I was delivering this conference or this content at a conference, it would carry a price tag of roughly $3,500. So the online version is less expensive. My goal is to, and this was the invitation I gave to BJ, is I would love for Washington State to be the first state to say, we have been intentional about developing the communication skills of our high school coaches so as to elevate the quality of the student athlete experience. It's a skill. Anybody can improve their communication, and doing so adds so much to not only the success of our programs, but how our student athletes transition from high school to college to life as human beings. So I'd love to make that happen. BJ and I are working on it. And within the next, I'd say within the next 10 days, we'll have a formal proposal out to hopefully allow Washington State to say, yeah, we did this because we know it matters.
That's cool.
And I'll tell you guys one thing. Betsy sent me an opportunity to do the course for free. I'm just about done with it. It's really good. It's inspiring. It gave me, even though I'm not actively working with kids every day, it gave me plenty of ideas, even in my work world every day, with staff and with working with our board and et cetera, et cetera. Lots of takeaways. It was really great. And Betsy's being super generous with us. And I've kind of been asking, you know, maybe Washington can be your first state. And so I would love to, we're going to work on it. We also want to make sure there's clock hours attached to it. I think that's really important for coaches to have that. I oversee the clock hour process in our office. And so I'm actively learning exactly how to be a clock hour provider. So I just want to make sure all of that is in sync. So when we put that out to our membership, not only is there a really great deal, thanks to Betsy, but we have the clock hours attached and all the things we need to make it work for our coaches. So
we're working on it.
I don't know about the rest of you guys, but it seems like life's been a little busier the last couple of weeks than it even was before. So again, thank you so much, Betsy, for your time with us today. It means a lot. And I know there's a handful of people in here that have heard you speak before. And I've gotten a couple of comments privately, just super glad that you're here with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And I wish you all the best. Please reach out if I can be of service, and stay safe and well. My best to your loved ones and your families. And thank you for doing what you do.
I want to make sure ADs and coaches know, I will plan on staying on this call. I think Cole will as well. If you guys have any questions that are really not Betsy related and you want to ask questions or ideas or even questions to Mick and I or what have you, you're welcome to stay on. We'll stay on for a few minutes until that slows down, but I want to give Betsy permission to get off if she'd like.
I've got another call coming up, so I do need to leave. Thank you, BJ. Thank you, Cole. Thank you
Thanks,
to
Betsy.
everyone that's on the call. Yep.
Thanks.
Take care, y'all.
So
Everybody,
again,
I've got one big question. Sorry to kick it off, BJ. I cut you off.
no, I'm glad you are.
Online cheer tryouts. Does anybody have anything in place or has discussions about that right now? Because we're about to embark on that project here probably by the end of the week. So I'm open to any thoughts and ideas anybody has.
Cole, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, this is John Barrington at Meade High School. Our cheerleaders completed that, had it actually sort of set up, assuming that we were going to be leaving school at the time we did, and they've completed it, and we're pretty successful with it. And so if you want information, shoot me an email. She shared the information with our sister school in our district, and I think that's they're planning on moving forward with the same plan.
Awesome. I will shoot you an email.
Okay.
John, was that done through Varsity Cheer and website Brand? I think it's our cheer coaches set that up for us.
Yeah, so what they did, their results when they chose their girls, they have not assigned them to varsity or JV. They just, a bunch of girls made the teams, and the plan is to make those decisions in the fall.
So
Okay.
I know that you were probably referring to varsity sports, varsity and USA Cheer. I believe you can go on the usacheer.com website, and they will have some suggestions on if you choose to go virtual, that they will have some ideas on their protocol to follow.
Okay.
So our school district made the interpretation that virtual cheer tryouts would be violating the spirit of the idea that all activities are canceled right now. And they have said no, because they were looking at, okay, then how many other groups are going to want to do some kind of virtual tryout, and trying to make sure that that doesn't make it seem like we're encouraging kids to get together and do things, because social distancing for kids is really, really hard. And I know we have tons of advanced music groups that are classes that will need to do tryouts at some point, and we don't know how long this is going to go on. So just maybe weigh in on kind of where the WIAA is about virtual tryouts and sports being canceled and all of that.
Stacy, if I can piggyback too on that real quick. What about if you do a virtual tryout, do you still have to get some form of clearance? So that, normally we require all of our cheerleaders to be cleared through our clearance process, eligibility wise, sports physical, etc., before they're eligible to try out. So is that going to be a requirement as well?
So typically when kids are trying out for sports, they've already registered on Family ID and have turned all of that in, and we make our cheer and dance team people do that too. But does the WIAA have an opinion on whether we can allow those things, or is that still just a district by district decision?
I'll weigh in to start, Stacy. It's a really good question. It's really a local decision. Spring sports are off, but school's still in session. So I would say, in my conversations with Governor Inslee's office and with Superintendent Reichdahl, they're very, very adamant that schools do everything they can to avoid students getting together. That's going to be the key of us having a chance to start in the fall as we typically do. There's a rising question about, how does this end and how do we reinitiate? And so anything that we do, I know there's a business side to it for varsity sports and being able to get their stuff ordered and sold and to the kids for cheer specifically. I don't know if we have that for all other sports and I don't know if that should be a driver for any one single activity or sport. So at this point, they're local decisions, similar to what Rick's working with communicating with students. Ours is we're not competing, but anything else short of what we govern is up to school. So unfortunately, we don't have a blanket statement for that, or nor should we. But that's the best we can do and just follow the intent of why we're not in school.
BJ, you responded in the chat room, but Mick, BJ, Cindy, you guys care to touch on anything summer sports or summer activities at this time?
Yeah, similar to the previous answer, at this point, we're getting a lot of questions, what about spring football? What about that? And at this point, everything is on hold, at least that we would be responsible for. Our jurisdiction basically ends at the end of state tournament. So it really becomes a school district to school district. What role we have agreed to play with OSPI and the governor's office is helping get the message out that they're trying to do because we have relationships like this. So anything moving forward out of season, I would say it's too early. Our board's literally looking at a 2-week instrument or 2-week time periods to see what's changing. If you're paying attention to the news, now they're saying, hey, maybe we hit our peak in Washington April 2nd. Maybe we've already hit it, who knows? And so every day it changes so much. So I know that's what the governor's doing. I know that's where Chris Reichel's getting his information from. And then it eventually filters down to us. So I would say at this point, I would not plan for anything. I'd just be prepared to act if it is. And so we want kids to have hope, but we also don't want to set them up for more heartbreak. So.
Thanks, Mick.
Suzanne, I see your question about can I reclassify? I think really asking around, can kids who didn't get to participate this year potentially have a 5th year of eligibility? We're also talking about that. I mean, that's just obviously you're not the first person to ask the question in the last few days. So we're talking about it. We're going to pull our eligibility chairs together, have some conversations. Gut feeling is really around, I mean, obviously we're still providing school, so there's still a high school diploma that kids are working towards achieving. So I would anticipate, just so you guys know, kind of moving forward, the April 22nd WASA Wednesday and the April 29th WASA Wednesday, our WI staff is going to be actively involved in going over the amendments. The first one, April 22nd, is going to be very eligibility heavy. Well, basically all of it will be eligibility. And I intend to answer that question at that time, thinking that we'll have a little bit more information and we'll be able to answer the question as well as go over some eligibility stuff and all the amendments related to eligibility. So I don't feel like I have a direct answer for you on that yet, but we're definitely working on it.
Mick, has there been any discussions with you and the superintendent of public instruction or the governor in regards to potential impacts on fall sports?
At this point, we anticipate we will be able to start. Where we're different than what we're hearing from the professional leagues and the colleges, they have a lot of travel, especially interstate travel, where we're primarily within our borders. And because the governor took action fairly quickly and we've had a very compliant state, we're seeing, good numbers. That moving forward, they don't know yet. I've asked that question specifically. They said there's a better chance than not that we will get started as long as we continue to see the compliance. So we are going to work as if, we're up and running as normal. What we are, we're doing contingency planning. What if we have an uptick at some point as people start going inside and closer proximity. What if the science doesn't catch up and we don't have a vaccine? So right now, the anticipation, what we're hearing from them, and they're working with UW and everybody else, is that there's a better chance than not that we'll get started as scheduled. And I do have a question for the group, and maybe just answer in the chat, but do you anticipate a lot of this year's seniors choosing not to graduate that could, simply because they come back and do an extra year of IB, AP, what have you, and or participate in spring sports? Do we really, are you hearing that out in the field? We're getting that question. I'm wondering how realistic is that at the high school level? So anyway, just an idea. I have set a meeting with all executive directors on the west side of the U.S. From other associations to talk about what they're dealing with eligibility as well. So we're trying to figure that out. Some of them had experience where they had large populations relocate after Katrina and some other issues that they have gone through this before. So we're going to try to learn what worked and didn't work in those states or those areas and then go from there. So
one of the conversations our eligibility chairs is also having is when kids do ask for a 5th year. You know, we've had situations where kids are requesting a 5th year and they only need a half of a credit to graduate. And so that puts kind of eligibility folks in kind of a challenging situation. Should you give them 1 semester of eligibility because they have, you know, 1 credit left, a half a credit left, that they should be able to finish it at the end of the first trimester or semester? So we're really, as an eligibility committee, kind of chewing around what's, you know, what that should look like. Should we have a standard of how many credits should you need in order to be given the extra year of eligibility? And so, you know, I just share that with you because that's all another piece of that conversation. So, you know, our governor has said that kids that were on track to graduate are going to, you know, should be able to graduate. So I'll be really curious where we land just philosophically around credits and how that impacts kids wanting to ask for potentially a 5th year. They're going to have to need some credits, obviously, to graduate. So, and I don't know how business offices are looking at that in terms of FTEs and getting kids off their books and, you know, and their graduation rates and those kind of things. So. I really appreciate people giving their thoughts on the chat. So Mick, thanks for asking the question. That'll help us as we wrestle with this.
Any other hot topics anybody wants to discuss?
I just had a couple of questions and maybe they'll be covered in the upcoming WSSAAA Wednesday topics, but looking at the one amendment that's proposed about the window of opportunity for transferring to another district, I have a couple families that have contacted me about wanting to transfer to Ferris from other schools in the area. None of them are from in our district, but our school district, not WIAA district. And I'm just thinking about if the kid is a sophomore or junior, the family is planning to make a move mostly because of location is closer to where the parents actually work. They are past their window of opportunity, but that wasn't a rule when they, I mean, some of the people are already making offers on houses and in the process of closing on houses. Do you have any idea what the enforcement of that would be like in terms of, can you, their window of opportunity is already passed, but it wasn't a rule at the time that it passed. So would that be something that would only impact incoming 9th graders because it's the first time that we've had that language, or how do you anticipate that if it passes?
Stacy, as you know, this is my first year in the job, but I don't believe that our amendments would be retroactive to allow kids that are already past the window of transfer to get to access that, unfortunately. So I would say if there are kids that are making a transfer that aren't in the window of transfer, they would have to have a hardship in order to get that varsity eligibility if they're doing it a different time of year for them.
Stacy, if they are moving, if the whole family is changing addresses, moving across town, aren't they eligible that way?
They would be under the current rules, but if that window of opportunity amendment passes, that seems like it would be different. And then there would be some technicalities to figure out about they closed on the house, or they, you know, made that offer to buy and it's all in process, and when that concludes and how does that impact things. Yeah, that's just kind of, it feels, and this is just the former history teacher in me, it feels a little bit like an ex post facto rule, that you're making something that used to be legal, not legal, and you might be in the middle of that action right now, not even knowing that the WIAA is talking about this. And so that, it just seems a little awkward to me, but.
Right. And we've talked about, you know, I think there are some of the, if these amendments pass, there are some rules that will have kind of a staggered entry on them. And so, you know, so Justin and I have had several conversations about that, about, you know, if a family were to move using kind of the current rules, they can go to a new school when they move. And so the timing of that and the rollout of that, we've had several conversations about that. And like I said, our eligibility committee is getting together on the 21st. And so we're going to wrestle with a bunch of those, Stacy. So I think we'll be, and any of you guys left on the call, if you are processing some of those, feel free to send me an email, or you can throw it in the chat as well, because we want to make sure that we as a committee have wrestled with as many of those as we can to help you guys be able to navigate it. So I really appreciate you bringing it up, Stacy, and it's good for us to be talking about that.
I have one question. This is Johnny Mills from Bothell. On eligibility, I have a situation where a parent's asking me, which probably is going to happen depending on how this goes, if we're on online schooling next fall, if they move to another online schooling program, which appears to be public school based, not private, would they maintain their eligibility at Bothell High School?
I think I'm following you. I'm not positive I followed exactly what you said, but I with all those online schools, it really has to do, I mean, I don't know if I can answer it, Yanni, just because I don't think I got my head wrapped around it good enough, what you're asking.
Okay, well, just out there, as this progresses, it will be really interesting to see what online schooling does with the fall and eligibility.
I totally agree. And I think there's going to be a lot of creative or just challenging situations around how kids were getting their grades or credits if families made shifts and went away from the public school as a result of the virus and are now trying to go back to the public school. It'll be interesting, and that's why we're going to wrestle with those. So I appreciate you bringing that one up as well. I also see there's a question here about when allocations will be finalized. I don't know if somebody else in my office wants to chime in. I'm happy to do so, but.
I'm here, BJ. I can tackle that one. So I'm working right now to get a projection of what things look like. We actually have a committee that's meeting tomorrow to look at all of the state tournaments, because with the new equitable entry, we're going to have different size tournaments to be managing next year. So currently going through that with that committee, and then hopefully within a couple of weeks, we can get some information out on what projections look like. Our current process has been that we tried to approve the 1A through 4A team allocations because we had a pretty good idea of what those were going to look like. So I will try to do as much of this as I can in the next couple of weeks so that we have some ideas and thoughts of what that's going to look like for the fall. But we will use our standard process in the fall, pending everything is back to normal, working with the district directors to verify all of the team and individual sports for all classifications. Does that help answer the question? These are great questions. I really appreciate people chiming in and asking.
because that's really what the point of these WSSAAA Wednesdays are, to get a good presentation and have a chance to ask questions and interact with each other. Stacy, I see your question about St. Martin's and volleyball. Cindy, can you see that question and or chime in?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that got started. St. Martin's has not pulled out. They are willing to, they needed us to lock in a date for this upcoming year because of a number of other events that they host. So we are locked in with them on the second week, which is what we had proposed for this 2A, 3A, 4A rotation between Yakima and St. Martin. So they're definitely in.
This is Dave Bennett from Vancouver. I'm curious about what other people are thinking about CPR and first aid with a lot of coaches, those expiring, if there might be any flexibility with online courses. So I know we're not able to offer our monthly courses as we have been.
I will let you know, one of the conversations that Cindy started with our board is on all of the hands-on certifications that are required, you know, from pole vault to stunt to first aid CPR, any of the recommendations that we have that are hands-on, we have started a conversation around alternatives to that. So that is a conversation we're having. I don't know if other EDs in this group have some other thoughts.
I will add, just in that process, we are waiting right now, kind of in a holding pattern, while our insurance provider checks on whether just on the legal ramifications of going to an online version of what has previously been a hands-on requirement. So like BJ said, it's in progress, but that's kind of where we are right now with that.
Thank you.
Good morning, this is Bob from Olympia. I have a seed plant for recovery. Since we lost the spring sports season, would we consider giving those coaches and kids who are not fall athletes an opportunity to have a fall month or something to make up some lost time?
I would say from our perspective, we are kicking around all those types of questions. Things that come back are on school districts as far as the cost for doing that, facilities and that. But I would say at this point, any suggestions and ideas are good ones. Right now, we're really focusing on what can we do for these spring athletes to support the efforts you guys are all doing out in the field. And then what do we do as part of the recovery next fall. Our first priority with the fall is just making sure we have a solid plan for any type of challenges that could come up to our general programming and go from there. So I would say any of those questions you're welcome to send to us, or ideas that you have, shoot them our way and we will definitely work on them.
I thought I would answer the question on Coaches School. Right now, both Coaches School and the Women in Sports Summit, Coaches School is end of July, Women in Sports Summit is August 10th. They're both on, scheduled, ready to roll. Coaches School will be in Yakima, the Women in Sports Summit in Seattle. We have not opened the registration for Coaches School yet, and the main reason is we wanted to kind of get through the next week or two just to really see what happens with the virus and what kind of recommendations we're having. Because we just didn't really want to open it and have schools start paying for it. And then for some reason, if it doesn't go like we would hope, then we got to work on kind of the reimbursement process. So if there's people that are wanting to send their coaches to Coaches School, the plan right now is to have it. We also are looking at ideas for an online version if we can't do that. So yes, both are ready to go. The Women in Sports Summit, the registration is up and we are accepting registration. We're actively getting registration. That one's in August. So hopefully that answers both of those for you guys. It's been great dialogue. I'd say anything else kind of for the good of the order? It's 9:30. We're happy to entertain any other questions before we close this out.
With loss of the spring season, and I'm sure you guys have all talked about it, would it be permissible to allow an extension into the fall, essentially? My baseball coach asked me about a potential fall ball scenario where he could coach any kids who weren't playing a fall sport, or maybe coach on an optional practice on a Sunday or something, since they lost their spring season. I don't know if that's been discussed at all, or if you guys could put that bug in the, I don't know, out of season rules committee, or whoever is in charge of that, probably the executive board, I suppose. But anyway, if that could be discussed at all.
Yeah, it can definitely be discussed, and that's something where we would want to weigh in, you know, with ADs, also superintendents, to see how they feel about that. But we want to do whatever we can to bring recovery to everyone without complicating what's already going on, what you have going on. So if districts could do it, could we make it possible? It's definitely a conversation we'll have with the board.
BJ, this is Andy again. I've got a number of emails that have come in asking about what we're going to do for Scholastic Awards and Scholastic Cup. Just so a quick update on that. We're working with the board. Hopefully we'll have an answer by next week to determine how we're going to process Scholastic Awards and Scholastic Cup for the rest of the year. We will get information out hopefully next week sometime on exactly what we're going to do with that.
Thanks, Andy. Will you also answer the question in the chat around the status of six-man football this coming fall?
Yeah, that's another one that we're going to be working with a group of people. The question came up, what happens if we have schools that want to play six-man? Does that impact the eight-man allocations? How many teams will they have to have in order to have a state championship if we do? So a lot of questions out there. We don't have any official answers at this point. I'm hoping to put together a small group of people that are closely related to six-man football and also the eight-man. So hopefully within a couple weeks, I'll have some more information on that. And as we get closer to the end of the WSSAAA Wednesdays with the amendments, I'll hopefully be able to provide more information so schools know exactly what that's going to look like.
I would also share with those of you guys still on the call here that, of course, these are recorded. They get posted up on both WSSAAA and WIAA. So this was really good discussion today. And as you interact with other ADs, making sure they know that this is available to them. The first week was, and now this one will be. And as we continue to go forward, we will continue to record those and upload them. There's a lot of great information that was shared today, and not just from Betsy, but just the interactions with these questions. Cole and I are, mostly Cole, but are working on continuing these through May. And so if you have, specific topics you think that would be valuable, your input would be greatly appreciated. You can message either Cole or myself moving forward. We just anticipate this is a great venue for our group to pull together and ask questions and feel like we have some connection between each other with the WSSAAA conference not happening. And just all the things that we would normally rely on. So, thanks again for your participation in this.
BJ, thanks so much for kicking this one off today and kind of moderating with Betsy. She was awesome. So look forward to seeing the partnership that can be developed. But if there's nothing else, you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week, and pass this along to anybody and everybody you know.